Chris, with valiance and in a very admirable fashion, put an umbrella. And it made me feel like I was the president of a small country.
Maybe the reason why I won today is because I lost to Andy in such a terrible way a month ago that he probably thought, okay, this guy is totally senile.
Ladies and gentlemen, the US Chess Championship kicked off yesterday in the St. Louis Chess Club, where nation's 12 best players are going to be battling each other on the chessboard for the most prestigious title in the American chess. I'm International Master Zura Jawahadze, and I will be breaking down highlights and interesting matchups for about next 2 weeks. So do consider subscribing and hitting that bell if you would like to see more about this tournament. Now, let's break down what you need to know. First, we start with an open section where the defending champion is Fabiano Caruana, world number 3 at the moment, and the total prize fund is going to be $250,000, $250,000. We have quite a few players that are above 2,700. The only missing player is Hikaru Nakamura. And this is the lineup. My former student, the Andy Woodward, is participating in this tournament, and you know already who I am cheering for. Now, the prize distribution is as follows. First place takes home 55,000, and if anyone wins all the games, that is going to be the Fisher prize, I believe, additional $60,000. Okay, this is the St. Louis Chess Club. Now, among the women's section, we have defending champion Carrisa at the top of the list. And then we have other 11 leading players from the American women's chess. The first place will take home $35,000. And as you can see, the clear winner's bonus is $5,000. Now, I am going to show you about 5 games from the round 1. And without further ado, let's get to it. First, I want to start with the game of Fabiano Caruana against his second Grigory Oparin. Fabiano starts with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, and we have on the board the Nimzo Indian. Bishop goes to b4, queen c2, pawn goes to d5. Now, if you are playing against your coach, basically, or second, someone who you exchange ideas a lot, how do you find new ideas? Well, Fabiano shows the way. He goes a3, and after bishop takes c3 here, he takes back with the unusual b takes c3 with the pawn. Queen takes c3 is the most common continuation, and at the high level, this has only been played 24 times. Okay, quite rare in a position that is as novel as the Nimzovich system, right, or Nimzo Indian, so-called. Now, Fabiano, after the game, said that c6 is not the best way to equality. I'm assuming he meant that probably short castle and going for c5 and immediately challenging the center would be better. But c6 also looks quite natural, after which Fabiano plays knight to f3, and Grigory delays here castling, which apparently is still probably the best continuation. And for a reason that we'll see here a little shortly. So first, Fabiano develops the bishop on this diagonal to pin the knight, and after retreating it to h4, white is ready to launch the g4, Geronimo. All right. And now obviously this pawn cannot be touched, and already we have a very unique position. White wants to open the g file as early as move 11 here, with the idea of castling long or not castling at all, and attacking the king caveman attack, or as Hikaru likes to call it, the cheese. He's going for the cheese immediately. Now, when someone attacks you on the side, the best way to counter it is opening up the center. So Grigory decides to open it with e5. c5 would probably be the other alternative here. Queen goes to e8 to get rid of the pin along this diagonal, prepare for e5. Now Fabiano opens the g file immediately, knight takes back, and after e5, c takes d5. c takes d5, and now that queen and the knight has been brought into the game, as well as the bishop, what is left? The rook and the bishop. So he brings another minor piece via b5, bishop to b5, pinning this knight on d7 and also creating the threat of bishop c6 down the line to attack the rook and maybe pawn on d5. Black, for some reason here, plays e4. I was expecting that something like a6 or maybe bishop b7 was going to be played here, but e4 to close the diagonal of the queen, so queen is not exerting the pressure on the h7 square here. Now rook to g1 to bring the rook on the open file, bishop goes to b7, and knight goes back to h3 to open the rook up. Now black also retreats the knight back to h7, and white brings the queen on the king side, or towards the king side, aiming to go probably g4 or h5 here. Now black attacks the c3 pawn with the check, so that has to be defended, and a very nice idea here. King safety is about where king feels the most safe. It's not always castling. Okay, in this case, king on d2 seems very safe, and at the same time as defending the pawn on c3, it is opening the rook on a1, if needed, sacrificing on g7 and then bringing the other rook, or simply doubling up on the g5. Now, as it was discussed in the post-game interview here, knight c5 was critical, but probably not the best. Fabiano was saying that the best move here probably is knight to f6, and he reviewed this line knight f4, then queen f5, and he was planning on doubling up on the g file here with rook g3, probably bringing the other rook. Still a very comfortable position for white, but game is not decided yet. After knight c5 here, the trick is white takes the knight, and after black captures white's knight on h3, queen to h5 is the key move, threatening to take on g7. For example, if black plays something like taking the pawn here, takes on g7, rook to g1 check, and not only that bishop f6 wins the queen here, but it's actually a checkmate because of the pin. So after queen h5 game is pretty much decided here, Grigory played g6, and immediate rook g6 here would be decisive, but Fabiano plays c6 first and takes on g6 after bishop retreats back. As you can see, little brilliancy here, and the point is, after sacrificing the rook, white brings another rook on the g file, threatening the checkmate, and black is not going to be able to stop all the white's threats here. Bishop e5 is coming next with the decisive force, right? A very nice miniature in the first round of the US Championships by Fabiano, and we could say that he is off to a hot start. In the second round, he is going to be facing my favorite in the tournament, Andy Woodward, and that game is going on as we speak, actually, at the time of recording this video. Another game I want to show you now was played by Andy. Andy played Levon Aronian. They faced each other not too long ago at the FIDE Grand Swiss, where Andy actually ended up winning that game with black colors. Now Andy was with white, And Levon, the legend of chess, not only the American chess or Armenian chess, I would say one of the greatest players of all time, and probably one of the strongest players that never became the world champion, at least yet. He goes for the Slav defense against Andy's Queen's Gambit, and after bishop h5 retreats back here, Andy decides to go for Queen b3 line, which is not the main line but is quite popular. The main line here is g4 and then knight e5, but he decides to go Queen b3 first, and only after Queen b6 play knight e5. I'm assuming he wants to go g4 next. However, Levon finds a smart idea here, which he probably knew before knight f to d7 instead of knight b to d7. So the idea is that after knight b d7 here, g4, knight e5 is not possible because de attacks the knight, and now this bishop is also under attack. But if you play with the knight f d7 after g4, black can take on e5, and after de, the knight is not hanging on f6, so bishop can simply retreat back. So after knight f d7, seemed like Andy was not too familiar with this position, and he started spending some time on the next few moves here. Knight retreats back to d7. White does not want to trade the knights here. Bishop goes back to g6, bishop d to bishop e7, and rook to c1. I thought that instead of rook c1 here, knight f4 would probably be simpler, but there's like queen b3 line, take bishop c2. So for that reason, Andy plays rook to c1. Now queens are traded off the board, and a knight goes to a6. One thing to keep in mind here also is the time situation. As you can see, Andy does not feel very comfortable. He spent 12 minutes on move knight e5, and then 10 minutes on move rook c1. That's usually the indication that he's not super comfortable. So knight f4 to attack this knight. Knight goes to b4, and another 16 minutes spent on this move, bishop to e2. While Levon keeps playing here very fast. Pawn to a5, short castle, knight takes g6, h takes g6, and we have queenless middle game on the board, where 3 minor pieces and 2 rooks are still on the board, and no pawns have been traded so far. Now is an interesting moment in the game. Andy goes rook to a1 to bring the rook on this open file. Levon plays knight c2, and now Andy moves the rook back to b1. It would be very interesting to see if played rook c1, if players would have repeated the moves here, but Andy declines the repetition. Now, this is not to say that Levon would repeat it, but I'm not sure if that is the best practical decision, to be honest, because he's already down to 35 minutes versus Levon's hour and 15 minutes. That's a substantial time advantage on the clock for black here. And being it a first round, I think here repeating the moves could have been a good practical decision. But the fighter that the Andy is, he goes for the rook f to c1 pretty quickly here. And after rook f d8, rook returns back to a1. However, this move turns out to be a little inaccuracy. Computer would have liked retreating the bishop to e1, and the reason for that is after rook takes a1, black trades the d pawn for the c pawn here and brings the knight on c5. Little tactic here, but mainly based on the strategical idea that c5 knight cannot be taken because of the rook d2, and now that rook becomes very powerful on the second rank. So knight from c5 is going to be threatening to go on b3, also going to d3 if needed. And another inaccuracy followed with bishop to d1. And More importantly here, as you can see, Andy spent additional 15 minutes, leaving himself with only 20 minutes for the remaining 20 moves. Okay, 20 moves, because after move 40, players get an additional 40 minutes, I believe. So quite uncomfortable, and quite few things here to deal with. Parental computer says that rook d1 simply would be a better move, but again, after knight b3 here, rook has to go on a3, knight takes d2, and there is rook on the x-ray of this bishop. So still, I would say black is already more comfortable here with move like e5, for example. That is also what happens after bishop d1. Black plays e5, and position is already very uncomfortable for white, because pieces are simply located very awkwardly. Now, giving into consideration that white has also very little time on the clock, already this is very unpleasant. Knight e6 to attack this pawn, and now after bishop g5, rook has to retreat again, and bishop goes back to f6 to attack the d4 pawn, and white is forced to go for this endgame of opposite colored bishops. But black is the only one who has targets here. d5 pawn is weak, b2 pawn is potentially also weak, so white has to find these very awkward moves not to lose the material immediately. And with very little time left on the clock here, under a minute, as you can see, I would say this is almost impossible to put together and defend. So a few moves later, the d pawn drops here, then b2 pawn now is also target. There are pins. Black pieces are a lot more active, so game was decided a few moves later. So very unfortunate start of the tournament for Indy, and I'm hoping that he can recover in the following rounds. The end here was pretty one-sided, because black king is a lot more active, pawns are way closer, and bishop is a lot better piece than the knight when pawns are both sides of the board. So f pawn is gonna decide the matters. So that was another game that I was very invested. I'll show you one more game from the men's section before I go into the women's section. Awonder Liang versus Abnimanyu Mishra. Awonder, very sharp player who recently crossed 2700. I believe this is his first time crossing 2700 after the Grand Swiss nice finish there. And Abnimanyu also gained some 40 points or so at the Grand Swiss and defeated the world champion. Basically, he is playing very well recently at a very modest 2652 rated, 2652. So encounter of young guns, let's see how it played out. c4, pawn to g6, knight goes to c3, pawn to c5. Interesting thing about Awonder is you'd think that 2700 players would usually use mainstream openings and their openings would be very sharp, but he is notorious for using lesser known lines. And that is also the case here. Pawn to e3 and d4. We already at the move 3 here, we have what Chess.com suggests as pterodactyl line. I had never heard of that. I would call this symmetrical English. But with e3, d4, it's not quite symmetrical already. C pawn is traded for the e pawn, and after knight f6, Awonder decides to take the center immediately with d5, not to allow black to play d5. So basically claiming the space here. Let's go short castle, knight f3, e6. Now black needs some breathing space there, so trades e pawn for the c pawn, and now we have back to symmetrical position, but with extra space for white. is that going to be a big deal? As we will see, it is quite a big deal here. White's position seems a bit more comfortable due to that space, and as we will see here in the next few moves, this was an interesting exchange. I thought giving up the dark square bishop, but knight on c4 is going to be forced to be reckoned with, because queen cannot comfortably defend this d6 pawn. For example, after queen to c7, b4, and now this extra stray is quite annoying on the c file. Let's say if you go there, knight e4, attacking the d6 pawn and probably winning it. So queen goes to b4, rook trade on e file, and it has to be taken with the bishop, because if rook takes, then knight takes d6 comes with the tempo. So bishop takes e8, pawn to a3, queen has to go to b3 here. Queens are traded off the board, and rook retreats to, or moves to e1. Here the point is, if you defend it, there is going to be rook d8, for example, there's going to be knight d6. Bishop d8 or f8 would be possible, but then there is knight e4 again, threatening to take on d6, or knight f6 check. So, excuse me, Mishra decides to give up the pawn here, knight c5, knight takes d6, and bishop d7, rook to e3. So white has an extra pawn, but black has a dark squared bishop. So computer still evaluates this as very close to equal here. However, this move bishop d4 now tips the advantage towards white. Point is, it attacks the f7 pawn. If you play a move like f5, for example, then b4, and now knight does not have a comfortable square, and you're going to lose the b7 pawn also. So bishop g4, rook goes to f4. Computer suggests that taking on f7 would be possible here and would win another pawn for white. If bishop e5, there is this move knight to c4 attacking the bishop, so you can't take, because then takes one bishop, checking the king, and then another bishop would be hanging. But you may be asking, what about bishop takes c3? Well, intermediate move. Now white gets enough time to move the rook while attacking the bishop here, so game would most likely continue with bishop b2, and now white managed to get rid of that dark square bishop and keep an extra pawn. So I think white would have a very considerable winning chances here. However, Awonder goes for rook f4, which also keeps an extra pawn here, but now black got to keep the dark square bishop. With opposite colored bishops, it's always tricky to convert. Let's see how it played out. Apparently knight b3 here gives white winning chances. The better move would have been a6. Now why is that the thing here? After rook c3, knight d4. Apparently rook c7 is the correct move, and after b6, a very unclear decision to me. I'm not sure why Awonder decided against bishop c4 after having spent well, he actually only spent a few seconds on this move, h4, to give king a loft. Now bishop c4 I think looks very straightforward here, attacking the rook and applying the pressure on f7, but he probably did not realize that after knight e6 here, this would give a white considerable winning advantage here. For example, after knight c7, bishop retreats to c4, white has an extra pawn, and the idea is to go knight c8 and attack this b6 pawn, or if bishop moves to g7 to go attack this pawn, then a4, and this is almost 1.5, okay, plus for white. So I think if Awonder had spent some time here, he would have figured out that that was giving white good winning chances. He goes h4, and the next move is actually the real mistake here, allowing rook e7, trading the rooks, because if you take on b4, then the end game of opposite colored bishops here would be a lot easier for black to hold. Now rook e7, rook takes e7, bishop takes e7. Now how is this position different than the one that we were talking about? As you can see now, the black knight in that situation would be left on c7, which is a lot more passive than the knight on d4 here. So after the rook trade, now the active knight here gives black a very good chances to defend, and that is kind of what happened in the game. Black played here very solid, fixed pawns, and fixed pawns on the square they desired. Basically, on the well, white pawns are now fixed on the light squares, so white won't be able to create a passer, okay, because this bishop on d8 is protecting the pawn on b6 very well, okay. So they played a few more moves here, but white was not able to pose any real problems, and a few moves later knights were traded, and opposite colored bishop ending was drawn without further difficulties, and they agreed on a draw. Now a few moves earlier bishop g6 was possible, but this would not have changed much, because now with only f pawn, black is simply gonna stay on the dark squares and white won't be able to make progress. So I think a little disappointing for Awonder here. He would have wished to push a little more, considering that he was up on the clock and had an extra pawn. So those were the 3 games that I wanted to show you from the open section. Now I will show you 2 games from the women's section, because the rest of the games in the open section were drawn. Now, first I want to show you Irina Krush, Grandmaster, the only Grandmaster, I believe, in the women's section, and not women's Grandmaster. I mean, she is the legend of American chess, many times winner of the US Championship. Facing Alice Lee, probably one of the most, if not the most, promising talents of the American chess. I have played her personally, and I was lucky to win that game, but barely, and she has been crushing since then. That was probably back in 2022. Now let's see what happened in this game. Irina starts as c4, but game quickly transposes it into queen's gambit declined, and a very topical line of bishop g4 is played in the game. Here white moves queen on c2. If queen was to go to b3, black's move usually here is I believe it's knight bd7, and taking on b7 here is going to be dangerous, because black is going to win the b2 pawn back, and then look at white's kingside. It's very undeveloped. So Irina does not want any of that smoke here, chooses to develop relatively calmly here. Knight e2, and a very interesting move here, in my opinion, queen to d7, played after 5 minutes of thought. I think c5 would be more in the spirit of the position. Maybe queen d7 aims to retreat the bishop on f5, but I think knight ends up in the awkward situation. So even though it's a computer's first line, I'm not super convinced with this move. Apparently the queen d7 was the only move here in the database. So very interesting. Now Irina again simplifies the mirrors here, takes the knight on f6, and after capturing bet puts the knight on f4, attacking this pawn on d5 twice. So black has to defend it, and then bishop goes to d3, now taking the charge of this diagonal. In general, in Carlsbad positions, this b1 h7 is a very important diagonal. If black is able to trade those bishops, it's considered that black is doing fine, or more than fine. Also, queen d6 at the moment threatening bishop takes d4, because the pawn is defending both, so that would win the pawn for black. light square bishop is kicked back, and then knight to h5. Bishop retreats back to d8 with the idea of setting up the battery on the diagonal here, which prompts white to play f4. Now black's response to f4 is c5, which is a very logical answer in my opinion. When white plays f4, black wants to counterattack the center here, but apparently this is a mistake because of tactical reasons. Even though white was not able to spot that tactic here, d takes c5, queen takes c5, and the very powerful move here is b4. All right, attacking the queen, and the apparently point is if you let's say take there is knight d5, you would want to take queen e3 with the check, but after king h1 white has a lot of activity. Rook is coming to e1, knight d5 is the threat, and black is gonna have hard time pairing all the threats here. For example, rook f3, rook is gonna come to g3 next, queen b2, discovery, and computer evaluates this as completely winning, as much as +3. All right, so black would have very difficult time here defending. As you can see, that was not an easy sequence to spot. So she goes queen f2, and now we're back to more or less a normal position before playing g6. G6 is apparently a blunder here. Black had to try to stop white's kingside expansion with f5, or king h8 first, then followed by f5 there. And the reason g6 is apparently a blunder is because now white is gonna have a very nice here and powerful move, e4, basically ignoring the threat of the knight, and after capture e5, and white demonstrates the power of the center here at its best, and the king mixed with the threats on the king and kingside attack. White's position is going to be crushing simply. f5, white wants to go f6 or queen g3 check, then f6, and king will be cut off from all the defending, and then bishop and queen should be able to deliver the checkmate there on the black king. Hey, that is kind of what happens here. King tries to run away, but it's not gonna run too far, because now the bishop is gonna come from this diagonal, stopping the king and then threatening the checkmate on g7. So white wins the queen, and then went on to win a few moves later. A very nice miniature by Irina Krush. Alisli, in my opinion, one of the strongest players in the field, but she hasn't been able to find her footing at the US Championships. So it is going to be interesting to see if this US Championship is going to be any different. I believe it's her third or so. Now, for the final game, I want to show you the game of defending champion Carrisa Ip, playing against women's grandmaster Atousa Pourkashiyan. Now, Atousa is, as a lot of you may know, married to Hikaru Nakamura. Definitely a power couple in the US chess scene, in the world chess scene, I would say. And what is very respectable and admirable is that Atousa is actually expecting a child, and as far as I read, she's in her 7th month. So playing chess at this level, as it's going to be seen in this game, I think deserves a lot of praise, and is very respectable. So now we'll see her game against the defending champ Carrisa Ip. Carrisa starts with e4, black plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we have Italian on the board. And after d3, Atousa decides to go for the h6 line. I've heard a lot of names on this, modern, or I personally call it a max lunge. and the idea is to play this h6 to stop knight g5 ideas, or also bishop g5, then play d6, and black will want to fianchetto the bishop on the next move with either playing g5, or if white encourages g5 is also very common with the potential of attacking on the king side. So Carrisa does not show her cards on the king side and goes with the quite common queen side expansion first with a4, a5 here, gaining some space, and c3. Now g5 would probably not make as much sense since white has not castled yet. So black decides to play g6 and develop the bishop that way here. So there is no weakness on f5. And black can safely castle on the next move. Now, knight d8 I thought was also a very interesting idea here, but I play this position quite a bit with black, and I'm always worried of white playing d4 in this position. So I'm not sure what Carrisa did not like into playing d4 here, maybe like knight h5, but I think this is still in white's favor here. Knight comes to f1, e3, potentially to d5 on the next. That's what I've thought here to be the best for white usually in these positions. But okay, Carrisa goes immediate knight f1, then bishop e6, brings the knight to e3. Now the light square bishops are traded here, and black brings the knight to e6. So we have a very standard slow maneuvering game for the Italian here. But I like black's chances actually, because black can hope to get the king side expansion going. Let's say if the king moves away, and then f5 ideas. Now we'll see how it plays out here. Rook b8 was the nice touch, f b8 to defend the pawn on b7, because if rook a b8, then there will be bishop a7. So some maneuvering here from both sides. White prepares probably for d4, black prepares for d5, but none of them are possible immediately because it would weaken the center. So some more regrouping here. I think f5 was possible here again, so I'm not 100% sure why Atousa decided against it. I would say something like this, but she was probably uncertain of this position, so we continue a little bit of maneuvering now. Knight ends up on b5 somehow, and the move later, black decides to trade the central pawn. Now after d5 e5, white gets the center, but this pawn center is actually very safely locked, and this is where Carrisa starts to get a little complacent, in my opinion. She could have gone with h4, which is the computer's recommendation to go h5 and try to open the position up here, but she she continues maneuvering here with no immediate target or goal in mind, and allowing f5, allowing knight e6, after which this idea of h4, h5 is not that relevant anymore, because now the knight on e6 provides a very nice blockading here, puts the target on the d4 pawn, potentially maybe f4, and that is kind of what happens here. Now again, knight f1 was apparently inaccuracy. Knight b3 towards c5 would have been better. After knight f1, f4 is allowed, and black suddenly takes over the initiative, opens up the g file here, and by the move 40, which players reached the time control and they got an additional time, black is already doing a lot better, I would say, and white has not made any progress. Queens have been traded off the board. Now this bishop is stuck defending these pawns. Black knights are very comfortable, as well as rooks, and the bishop also has targets here, and as you can see, all the white pawns are stuck on the dark squares, basically target for the black bishop. Okay, king f7 getting king off, that was also a very nice touch. And a few moves later here, the game was decided because of tactics. Okay, this king gets stuck, knight d4, rook h4 is going to be the checkmate. So the I would say total collapse from the defending champ, and a very respectable win from Atousa. Right, so it is going to be interesting to see both players going forward. This was only round 1, and we were spoiled with quite a bit of action. So do let me know what you thought of the first round. Which game was your favorite? Who you were cheering for in the tournament? And do consider supporting the channel by simply subscribing. All right, cheers guys, I'll see you in round 2.